to Daily Manna. I pray that you are having a blessed and marvelous afternoon. For those that are at work, that God is giving you favor, and you're just having such a productive day. What a word. We began on yesterday talking about the ministry of Stephen, and we learned yesterday that Stephen was an anointed man of God, and God was doing great things in his life, even at an early age. And in the midst of him doing God's work and doing the favor of God shining on his life, he had some antagonists, some people who came up against him, and they even launched a final attack. So here he is, Stephen. He's had that final attack. He's been seized. And we jump into chapter 7 in the book of Acts, and we cover the first 8 verses today. I'm still reading out of the Message version. That's what we began on yesterday. And hear these words in Acts chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. Then the chief priest said, "What do you have to say for yourself?" Stephen replied, "Friends, fathers, and brothers, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was still in Mesopotamia, before the move to Haran, and told him, 'Leave your country and family and go to the land I'll show you.' So he left the country of the Chaldees and moved to Haran. After the death of his father, he immigrated to this country where you now live. But God gave him nothing, not so much as a foothold. He did promise to give the country to him and his son later on, even though Abraham had no son at the time. God let him know that his offspring would move to an alien country where they would be enslaved and brutalized for 400 years. But God said, 'I will step in and take care of those slaveholders and bring my people out. They can worship, so that they can worship me in this place.'" Verse 8, "Then he made a covenant with him and signed it in Abraham's flesh by circumcision. When Abraham had his son Isaac, within 8 days he reproduced the sign of circumcision in him. Isaac became father of Jacob, and Jacob father of 12 fathers, each faithfully passing on the covenant sign." So here it is, Stephen. He's been seized, and he now finds himself defending himself for being falsely accused when he was tried by his antagonist. And here it is, in his defense, he begins this history lesson. And the lesson basically really is, he's showing the children of Israel, he's showing those in leadership, how they are just as rebellious as the generation before them, as their ancestors were. And so he goes all the way back. He goes all the way back to the beginning. He goes back to Moses, and he talks about the promise that God made to Abraham, that God told Abraham to move from the land where he was comfortable at and move to a land that he was going to show him, or the land that was away from his father. And even in the midst of his promise to Abraham, he told him that his ancestors, now we all know the story, that Abraham at that time was old in age and had not had a child. But God made a promise to him. And I love the Lord because he's not slack on his promises. When God promises us something, we can take it to the bank, cash it, and we know that it's going to come to pass. So he begins by talking about the promise that God made to Abraham. And then he moves and talks about the prophecy of their enslavement. We really don't talk about this a lot, but God had already told Abraham exactly what it was that was going to happen to his people. So God gave him a prophecy of the enslavement of his people. He says that they're going to be in captive and in bondage. And he gave them the exact time. He said for 400 years that your people will be in bondage. And he foretold that they will be in this foreign land in Egypt, and they will be in bondage. But God still continued to bless Abraham through the midst of this promise and the prophecy that he was telling them. And he talked about the patriarchs, and we know Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're the patriarchs of the children of Israel. And he talks about the covenant that he has with them, the sealed covenant through the sign of circumcision. And they pass it along from generation to generation to generation. What a mighty God we serve, that he will keep his promises, and that he spoke into Abraham's life exactly what it was that was going to come to pass for his people. But in the midst of him talking about what was going to come to pass in his people, he establishes a covenant with his people that gets passed along from generation to generation. And I love the Lord because he fulfilled everything that he had told to Abraham. So Stephen begins the defense of himself by taking those in the council all the way back. And he goes all the way back, and it goes back to Abraham to begin the history lesson for them, to show these people that they're just as rebellious as their ancestors before them. Well, we're out of time, but we're not out of word. I'm looking forward to coming back on tomorrow and continuing on this story as Stephen continues to defend himself. Have a blessed and marvelous rest of your afternoon.